Okay, good evening, everyone. We are continuing with our Hilchos Shabbos in the Tzurba Min Rabbanan, the Lax family edition. We're in the Lax family base medrash, and so they have a lot of Tefillos, and we are now in the volume 16 of the Weiss family volume, beginning with Shiur Hay. Shiur Hay in the Sefer begins on page 193. But I also printed out, if you want to use just the Makoros that we're going to be using tonight, I printed out some of the source material for you. Okay. Also, just want to let you know, there's going to be a speaker, Rabbi Edri, at 9:30. He's part of the rebuilding after October 7th, and he also has had a number of experiences he's going to share with us about October 7th. So, figure to Ami Younger for organizing that. So that's why we're tonight at 9 o'clock. Okay, so we dealt with Erev Shabbos, what to do, what not to do, traveling. Most recently we talked about some of the shilas that come up about Tosefes Shabbos. Just to mention this before, because it came up, a lot of people were saying, we davened mincha too late, and it was a little bit tight. So try the best you can to leave a minute or two before Shkia so that you can accept Shabbos. I said to people that I actually, I said I'm Mekabel Shabbos. I accept to celebrate Shabbos, to keep Shabbos, and not to do any malacha. And I looked at my watch and I tried to time it, but I think that the tzibur was still davening a little bit of mincha, but I thought at that point I wanted to be Mekayim, the mitzvah deraisa, according to most of being Mekabel Shabbos. So now we're going to talk about the Tefillos of Shabbos. It's actually two parts, Shiur Hay and Shiur Vav. So we begin with Mincha on Erev Shabbos. Source number 1, the Tur in Or Chaim Siman Reish Samach Zayin. He says that when you daven Mincha on Erev Shabbos, you don't do Tachana and Ein Noflin Al Pneim, which is interesting because you could say, well, if you're coming right into Shabbos a few minutes before, okay, we understand why you wouldn't say Tachana. It's like the Or of Shabbos is already there. But if you say right after Chatzos, Mincha Gedola Acher Chatzos, as the Mishabura writes in source number 4. So why would you say that there's no Tachanun? And Tachanun is, we don't say Tachanun when it's a happy occasion. But it's so much earlier than Shabbos is. So we see that the beginning of the joy of Shabbos it begins at the time of even just after Chatzos. And that's really why we don't say Tachanun, because we're getting already into the mode and to the excitement of Shabbos. And as we mentioned a moment ago, the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa says, try your best to daven Mincha a little bit early so that you have at least a minute or two to be Mekabel Shabbos a little bit early, a bit of Tosefes Shabbos, which we mentioned is a mitzvah da'araisa. What if I came late to shul? It's happens to the best of us. It's difficult these weeks. So you come late to shul, and they're already davening L'chadodi, they're already davening Kabbalah Shabbos. Let's say they're already at Baruch Hu, and I didn't daven Mincha yet. So, first of all, if they said Baruch Hu already, we spoke about this last time a little bit, but I certainly shouldn't go in and daven Mincha in the room. The Ishi Yisrael, which is a sefer on Tefillah, he says that it's really better if you go outside and daven outside Mincha. I have some memories of that, doing that with my father, standing outside, davening Mincha in the shul. But if you, let's say that you got there a little before, let's say, I don't know, they're davening Kabbalah Shabbos. So, and let's up the ante a bit. Let's talk about, it's freezing outside and there's only one room. So what am I supposed to do? Go outside? So he does say if there's no other option, says you could still daven there while the Kehila is davening Kabbalah Shabbos. But it's probably be better if you could to daven Mincha before going in. Where does the whole text of Kabbalah Shabbos even come from? We're going quickly, but we're going to move from Mincha into Kabbalah Shabbos. Where does it come from? So the text itself is only about 500 years old. It comes from the Kabbalists in Tzfas. Shlomo Akabetz, he writes the L'chadodi, but also just the putting together of the different parakim of Tehillim comes from about 500 years ago. But the concept of greeting the Shabbos with some sort of pomp and circumstance comes from the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yud Tes, source number 7. And it says that a number of Amoram would go out and wrap themselves in a talis and go out and say, "Bo even not say likras Shabbos hamalko." Let's go out. V'neitzei likras Shabbos malko. Let's go out and greet the Shabbos queen. And another Amora said, "Boi kala, boi kala." Now I found it very interesting that there are a few of the mizmorim that we say, or you could call it the prakim of Tehillim, that do have sources. How do we know that the brachos in our Shemona, we call it a Shemona Esrei, but when we say it says colloquially the Shemona Esrei, but it's really the Amida. How do we know on Shabbos it's only 7 brachos in the Amida? So the Gemara in Brachos, Chav Tesam and Alf tells us, because in Mizmor LeDavid, it says 7 times the word kol. Keneged Shiva Kolos Shamar David Al Amayim. And without getting into all the details of why that's related to Shabbos, but the Gemara assumes that it's talking about Shabbos. So we say Mizmor LeDavid going into Shabbos because that's how we even know the halachos of the seven brachos of Shemona Esrei. So I found that to be interesting. I found also another interesting source. Mizmor Shir Le'Yom HaShabbos. Okay, that's an obvious one, right? But there's the even earlier source. Why we would say Mizmor Shir Le'Yom HaShabbos on Shabbos. We say it in the morning also. So granted, I understand it's not a proof necessarily to say it at night, but it makes a lot of sense. I found a Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, an Emes Liakov, in Parsha Shmos. Have to thank Rav Shalom Rosner for this one. He has a comment of a medrash. The medrash says that there were Megillos. This was way before the times of the printing press, but in Mitzrayim, and the Jews were enslaved in Egypt. So they had Megillos, they had these little scrolls. What was written on these scrolls? So they were things that they would, I guess when they had a respite, that Paro wasn't beating them, they would have certain mantras, certain things that would give them, like those inspirational quotes on the, they would have certain texts. So he says they were Megillos. One of those Megillos was Mizmor Shir Le'Yom HaShabbos. Because if you look at Mizmor Shir Le'Yom HaShabbos, it's all about Lasid Lovo, Tzadik V'Ralo. It's talking about the future redemption. It's talking about whether there's going to be good for the, right? Tzadik Tamar Yifrach Keretz Ba'avon Yizkeh. It's nothing to do, what does it have to do with Shabbos? Because the concept of Shabbos is that it's, a futuristic, a belief in a world that will be redeemed, and it was giving them that chizuk through the difficult and long gullus. And he writes that when Paro wanted to make the shibud even more difficult on them, he took away Shabbos. That's what the Medrash says. He took away Shabbos because he didn't want them reading these things. He didn't want them to have this special, I guess you could call it the secret ingredient to Jewish survival and continuity. He wanted them to be broken. And I think it's just fascinating to think about and to reflect upon how Jews, according to this medrash, it's a medrash in, I don't have it on your source sheet, so I apologize, but if you want to see it, it's in Emes Liakov in the end of end of Parsha Shemos. It's a medrash, Shemos Rabbah Parsha Hey, Osir Ches. According to this medrash, even before David HaMelech, I guess, codified it or wrote it down, for thousands of years we had these Megillos and this particular Mizmor we've been saying for thousands of years. It's given us the strength to continue on in the long Galus. So I think that's just a beautiful idea about Mizmor Shir Le'Yom HaShabbos. Okay, Bameh Balikin. Why do we say Bameh Balikin? So the Shulchan Aruch in Or Chaim, Ayin Reish, or Reish Ayin, Siv Aleph and Beis, tells us, source number 12, it tells us that Noagin Lomar Perak B'meh Madlikin. Why do we do it? So pretty obvious. Okay, it's talking about lighting Shabbos candles. You want to begin Shabbos with Talmud Torah. Fine. There are people who say Kegavna. I think that's really the determining factor. If you're Nusach Sfard, if you're really Nusach Sfard, you say Kegavna. If you're kind of a wannabe, so then, and I'm totally not Nusach Sfard, so I'm not. But I don't say Kegavna. But if you know Kegavna, then you really are Nusach Sfard. So that is B'meh Madlikin. Ma'ariv of Shabbos has a few interesting halachos. First of all, the Torah writes in this is source number 13, Reish Samach Zayin. The Torah writes that, I think the staples are on the wrong side, so I apologize. The Torah writes that we end the Chasima, instead of saying Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, we change it a little bit, and we don't say that. We don't even have to say Shomer Yisrael La'ad at all. Why don't we have to say that? So the Torah writes, very powerful words, because Shabbos is a shomer. Shabbos is a shmira on us. Ein tzrichin shmira Shabbos shomer. You don't need to have any guarding on Shabbos because Shabbos is the shmira I think it's Abba Iban, that more than the Jew keeps the Shabbos keeps or guards the Jew. It's not even, it's a chara'am. So we see that Shabbos is a shomer and it guards us. The Torah says that the minhag is to say v'shamru b'nei Yisrael as Shabbos. Now, the question is that we generally have a principle called somech geula tefillah. You have to seamlessly go from the end of Kriya Shema, Birchas Kriya Shema, into Shemona Esrei. You're not supposed to have a break in the middle. So the Gemara in Brachos discusses this, and the Gemara says, how do we have Hashkivenu? How are we allowed to say a Mar of Hashkivenu? So the Gemara says that's called Geula Arichta. It's a continuation of the Geula process about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Rabbi Yonah says this is what the Jews used to say in Mitzrayim during Makas Bechoros. It's part of the story of our redemption. What about Hashem Savasai Tiftach? So the Gemara says that's Tefillah Arichta. It's part of our introduction into the Tefillah. But if we're not allowed to have a hefsek, how can we say V'shamru? How can we say V'shamru? Welcome to sit next to me. I don't know if it's too close for comfort. Whatever you want. It's a little bit sticky over here. What about Kaddish? Kaddish is not a problem because Kaddish is part of the Tefillah. It's not considered a hefsek. I imagine it's considered Tefillah, part of Tefillah. But the question is, why is Vishamru not a problem of a hefsek? So the Torah addresses that, and he says it's not a problem because it's mi'ein geula. Mi'ein geula. What does that mean exactly? Probably because we don't have to assume probably. The Torah tells us. He says She'im yishamru Yisrael beis Shabbosos miyad nigalin. If the Jewish people were to keep 2 Shabbosos, we would immediately be free. Now, why is it just one Shabbos and we'll all be free? I believe because we have a tradition that we already did keep one Shabbos. Maybe it was that's what the song is coming from. I don't know exactly. Who wrote? Is that an Avram Fried or who's? MBD. Seems like I'm really off on my pop references here, and that's not even pop or whatever it is. But so fine. Then we have. But the thing is, ask me some other questions. What do we do in between Kriya Shema and Shemona Esrei? We do other things. We like to throw things in there all the time. Anybody? What? Baruch Hashem Le'olam. But that I think is part of the Hashkivenu, I imagine. But when it comes to Yamim Tovim, we say Vayidaber Moshe al Bnei Yisrael. Right? We say Tikku b'chol shofar b'chesed yom chagenu on Rosh Hashanah. Ubiyom hazeh yichaper aleichem. Right? All these things. So there's very interesting answers to all these questions. Because some of the Mefarshim on the Shulchan Aruch, I don't think I have this on your source sheet, and I think but some say that Geulas Nefesh, I think the Levush says Geulas Nefesh is considered to be when you're getting forgiven for all your sins. That's considered like Geula. Vayidaber Moshe is the Yamim Tovim. Yamim Tovim are all Zecher L'Yitzias Mitzrayim. But there's a very good answer that some of the Rishonim give. A very simple answer. When we want to remind you what Shemona Esrei to say, so maybe we could bang on the table and say, don't forget Shalosh Regalim or Yalav Yamvo, right? Or we could say a pasuk, right? Tikka b'chodesh shofar. Don't forget, you say the Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah. So it's not a Geula Arichta, it's not a Tefillah Arichta, it's a Tzorach Tefillah, which is not a hefsek. It's not a hefsek. If somebody asks you, what page are we? What's the page number for the siddur? I'm allowed to tell them because it's tzorech tefillah. I'm allowed to do something which is the tzorech tefillah. Okay. Then we say something interesting in Shemona Esrei. We say a psukim called Vayechulu, right? Vayechulu Shemayim Ha'aretz. What is Vayechulu that we say in Shemona Esrei? So it seems to be that we're declaring that Hashem created the world and He rested on the Shabbos. Now, the Gemara in Shabbos, Taf Kuf Yutes Amud Beis, he says that when a person says Vayechulu on Shabbos, Mala Allah v'Akosov Ki'ilu Nase Shutif LaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Maaseh Bereishis. It's as if I'm partnering with Hashem in the creation of the world. Yes, God created the world already, but when I recognize it and then when I formulated on Shabbos, I'm considered to be partnering with Hashem. Now, what's interesting is, why do we say it again? We just said it a second ago in Shemona Esrei. Now, when we do, it's called a Me'in Sheva, we do this seemingly, it's called Magen Avos or whatever. It's Me'in HaGeula, whatever. Let's see what the actual posting referred to it as. I think they call it a Me'in Sheva. It seems to be like a Chazaras Hashatz of sorts. And we begin with it by saying Vayichulu. We just said Vayichulu a second ago, so why are we saying it again? Very interesting rush. I think Eitan's going to give me a hard time. Is going to give me a hard time for this one. Wait for it. The rush says, since on Yontif that falls out on Shabbos, we don't say Vayichulu in the Shemona Esrei. So therefore, every single Shabbos, we have to say Vayichulu again. It's a low plug. It's a low plug the opposite way. Usually we say, okay, we have a rule. It's going to apply 9 times out of 10, but we'll throw in the 10th time. 90% of the time it has it, and the 10% we'll just throw in also. Here it's only 2% of the time, so we'll throw in the rest of the 98%. Very, very strange. No, you don't like that one. That's the rush. The rush Sachim. He says, Mishum tikeshachal yos yontiv b'Shabbos. Omer matav v'chartanav v'lo aminu b'soch hatfila. Tzarach lomer la'achar hatfila l'kach nogin lomer came b'chol Shabbosos hashana. I don't know of any other example where we have a low plug on a 2% of the time. Now, there's another reason which may be more convincing, which is the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch Reish Samach Siv Zayin. Shulchan Aruch writes that we want to welcome Stevie. We upgraded to spicy sauce. If you want to dip your coppers in the spicy sauce. The Shulchan Aruch says, for those who weren't able to see it, we are very, Baruch Hashem, we're very fortunate. Many of us are able to read Hebrew. Most people who have a Jewish education could read Hebrew, but back in the day, people couldn't even read. So in order to be motzi, those who did not know how to actually daven, we say it out loud, and people would be able to say it along or to hear it and to be yotzei. The next halacha, which is a fascinating halacha, you may notice, sometimes guys come back from Shana Aleph and they get certain things they pick up, certain hanhagos. One of them is, can you say Vayichulu with me? You know that one? They mean well. That was probably me 10 years ago. Where does this come from? What is the reason to do this? So, it actually comes from an interesting halacha. The next halacha that the Shulchan Aruch writes, he says you should stand up, loud and standing up. Why? So he doesn't say why, but the Taz says why. The Taz says because it's considered to be edus. It's considered to be testimony. And you can't have edus liyachid. You can't have edus by yourself. And therefore you need to stand up. You're giving testimony to God resting on the seventh day. This developed into the Minhag Yisrael of Shana Aleph guys coming on saying, can you repeat, can you go back and say it again with me? It's a strange thing. It's a very strange thing. I'm not saying it's a wrong thing. It became a minhag for people to go and to say it all together. Okay, so let's just stop for a second. Can I say it with my father? It's nighttime. It's nighttime. Since when does Eidos have to be said simultaneously? Eidos is always first the first witness says it, then the second witness says it afterwards. Dafka not. The Or L'Tzion, he says that the Bir Halacha says something very interesting, even more than the Shana Aleph guy. The Bir Halacha says, I should daven, he quotes from the Pri Megadim, source number 21, I should daven my Shemona Esrei a little bit faster in order that I don't miss people saying Vayichulu. So the Or L'Tzion says, no, don't daven your Shemona Esrei faster. Shemona Esrei is from the Knesset. I'm maybe dramatizing this a little bit, but it's Anshe Knesset Gadola made the Shemona Esrei, and because the Taz said a shtickle minhag that you should say it together with people, you should rush your davening. It doesn't make sense.
Say it really slow. You could say you're Vayichulu.
Oh, you're Vayichulu there. It has to be b'kol ram and mu'umad according to the Shulchan Aruch, so it doesn't. But I hear you. So the Or L'Tzion says you don't have to. And by the way, the Chazon Ish, if you want to feel a little bit better about yourself that at least you have the Chazon Ish on your side if you're anti this minhag. And I'm not saying I'm anti, it's an interesting thing. Whenever you see a lot of people doing something, you have to just ask yourself, is there a reason for this? Or are people just doing what other people are doing and everyone's following somebody else? It's like the Rebbe picks up the cup and he looks at it, and everyone picks up the cup and looks at it. Right? Why are you doing that? I was checking if there was any water in it, but the milk. There's a bunch of stories like this. Right, it's expired. There's a lot of stories like this. So I'm not saying we shouldn't follow communal practices. I'm not anti this minhag, but it's a good thing to be intellectually honest and just curious. Maybe I'm just doing it because someone else did it and I didn't ask the question. I didn't look into it. So the Chazon Ish says the most, I think, strongest is that he says, okay, it's a nice thing to do with more people. It's a nice thing, but it's certainly not found in the poskim, and it's certainly not a real edus, and therefore there's no reason to really to do it. Okay, we have a few more minutes. After that, I mentioned this before, we do Me'ein Sheva. What exactly is this Me'ein Sheva? We say almost like a mini Chazar Sashatz. We don't do Chazar Sashatz at night. We never do Chazar Sashatz. Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit off topic.
Yeah.
When are you making the mitzvah of Zachor? Like, is it in davening or is it like
of Zechiras Shabbos?
Yeah.
So the Gemara says that Zachor is mitzvahs aseh and Shamar is mitzvahs lo aseh.
Yeah.
Did you mean like the mitzvah to remember Shabbos every day? I think there's also that's one of the constant mitzvahs to remember Shabbos.
This is also like a classic question, right? Like if a man says, if the man says Beichul in shul, maybe he's hears Kiddush in shul, then he's Yotzei Zachor, right? Then he goes home, and his wife hasn't, and this is a classic thing. And then his wife hasn't, so how is he able to make Kiddush for his wife?
So what is the mitzvah of Zachor in that case? You're saying there's an extra mitzvah to...
I don't know if Zachor is a mitzvah that you're Yotzi, that you do once. It's like, when are you Shomer Shabbos? Like, what action? Throughout Shabbat. Zocher Shabbat.
I've heard that. I think there's a Rabbi Kiva Eger. I'm trying to remember what that is.
Kiva Eger says no, it is Rabbi Kiva Eger. He says to say good Shabbos.
If you say good Shabbos...
That's Mekabel Shabbat. That's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I think.
Also not. I remember at some point
Okay.
in the middle of the night.
Let me know. There's some... I know I've heard of this issue before.
When you make Kiddush, that's Zechiras Shabbos, right?
Well, there's a mitzvah to say, well, it depends on if you're doing the nighttime or the daytime, but there's a mitzvah of Kiddush. Mitzvah of Kiddush. I mean, that's a separate mitzvah.
Over one.
Kiddush al kos, right. Yeah.
It's also where he stands, Friday night Kiddush.
Why do you stand by v'chul? Why do you stand by when you say Vaychulu, right? Vaychulu, right? There you go. You say Vaychulu again. So I stand. Not everybody stands, but I stand for that part and then sit down. But we're going to get to that. That's a whole topic in itself. Because not everyone stands for the whole time. Some people stand for the whole time. So the next thing we do. So maybe the answer is that we'll get back to you. Get back to you and get back to David because we have to do more research. That's important for me to learn this also, right? It's not. So, what do we do next? We do Me'ein Sheva. So why are we doing Chazar Sashatz at night? We never do it. So there's an interesting line. The Gemara says it's a Shas Sakana. The Gemara in Chav Daled on the base says we add on extra davening because it was dangerous. Seemingly, the way that the Taz explains it is that seemingly they would have these minyanim out in the fields. It was dangerous, and if someone would come late. So the Taz says, if you take a look, I remember also hearing that other people mention other tefillos, like maybe Bameh Madlikin, that you would or make it longer, or like they said during Marv. But the Taz says specifically that the Me'ein Sheva is to lengthen the davening, because maybe some people would come late. I don't really know what that means exactly, but seemingly they would have their shuls in the fields, and some would come late. And therefore, we need to add to the davening to extend it a little bit longer, so they wouldn't be alone, so they wouldn't be maybe ambushed, or someone couldn't hurt them. So it's actually a fascinating halacha. It's a kana for latecomers, not to encourage latecomers, but what can you do? It's a sakana. So because of this, the Shulchan Aruch writes you shouldn't say Me'ein Sheva when you're alone. Now it's interesting. You may know this halacha. It comes up when you're like at a Shabbos bar mitzvah somewhere, and it's not a kavua minyan. It's not a kavua minyan. So do you say it? So the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch just said that if you're alone, you don't say it. In Yachid Omer in the Reish Lamed Ches Ches. But the Rivash was asked this question, and he says, "Ein Omer also bebeis chasanim." Because they would have a minyan by a chasan's simcha, or bebeis avel. Only in the structure of a shul. What if you have a? I know of such things. There are communities that have house minyanim on Friday night. What about if you have a house minyan? A kavua house minyan every single week. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, the whole reason that we did it was so the latecomers are going to come. So it was never relevant unless it was a shul outside in this field. But it seems like the Mishnah Berurah addresses the house minyan and says, in a base avel, or if you just have Kishis Kviyas al Eze Yamim, source number 32. V'ish Sefer Torah Etzlam. If you have a set minyan and they have a Sefer Torah, you're not reading from the Sefer Torah. So Rav Moshe asks a question. He's like, I don't even. Rav Moshe Feinstein. He says, I don't understand what he's talking about. Why do you need the Sefer Torah? He doesn't understand. So seemingly, if you have a minyan kavua every single week, you would say Magen Avos and Mein Sheva. Now, what if you have a rotating house minyan? It's not always in the same house. What? The minyan's kavua, but the place is not. So maybe you have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi, but maybe not your shul rabbi. You have to ask the other, not your rabbi, but you have to, because the rabbi is going to say, "Come to shul." Come to shul. Ask your block minyan rabbi. If you, I think they say Magen. I don't know. I don't really know. They do say. They say, but it's not a rotating one. It's not always in his house.
It's always a one.
University, they didn't even say it. I don't know why.
I think it's still a kavua.
But just if people know, the reason why we do this is for latecomers aren't going to be in danger. Just so you should understand. Okay, I guess the last thing is that I got confused with the staples being on the wrong side here. We didn't get to the eating before. Okay, but it's 9:30, so I don't want to go any longer. And we have Rav Edry is going to speak. Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that next time. Okay, have a wonderful evening, guys. Good Shabbos.